Well, we're usually talking together on a Wednesday, but today is Thursday, and Jack Veltri and I are coming at you live for another edition of GC Live. Welcome in, everybody. I am Kendall Smith. Hope you're having a great day so far. Jack, you've had a busy week. How are you?
I'm doing good, Kendall. It's definitely been busy. Was in Rock Hill earlier this week to cover South Carolina winter baseball, and I was in Fort Mill yesterday. It was snowing, surprisingly enough. Is there still snow coming on the ground there in behind you?
So it is very sunny behind me right now. It's actually crazy because it was snowing earlier this morning, and then now it's completely sunny. It looks like it's spring outside. This morning it looked like it was winter outside. So you never know what you're going to get here in Charlotte, but I will say it's kind of crazy that it snowed 3 times this year. It hasn't snowed in Charlotte in like 2 years, and now we get 3 snowfalls in 1 year. So, hey, I'm ready for spring. I will say that. And baseball season is officially in full swing, no pun intended. So that means that spring weather has to come. And it's kind of crazy that it was that cold in Columbia. Do you remember, Jack, this is totally off topic, when it snowed our junior year of college?
Oh, yeah. It was a heavy
in Columbia
downpour snow. Yes, a heavy downpour snow. Kind of basically what we got yesterday up in the Charlotte, Fort Mill area. Like, a lot of snow coming down.
Yeah, for sure. And yesterday, South Carolina and Columbia specifically experiencing some rough weather, but the Gamecocks still played. We're going to talk about the midweek games in just a little bit, but want to start off the top of the show with some breaking news that we learned of a little bit earlier today. Very unfortunate news for the South Carolina baseball team. Paul Mainieri came out. He talked to the media and he let everybody know that Eli Jerzembeck will be out for the rest of the season. Unfortunately, he has a stress fracture in his right elbow. He's going to have surgery on that on March 7th. So first and foremost, just wishing Eli the absolute best and a very speedy recovery. We can't stand to hear this when you hear of these injuries with guys, especially a guy like Jerzembeck, so much talent and so much hope and promise heading into this year. Everybody was so excited to see what he can bring to the table. So just to hear that he won't be playing and won't be available for South Carolina this season, obviously such a tough loss for this group. Jack, what was your initial reaction?
I'm not going to lie. I figured it was not going to be good news when, Mainieri had brought it up, I think, the day before opening day last Thursday, that Jerzembeck had went to go see a doctor and stuff. And so you expect something to happen from that. And this was the worst outcome you could have gotten, that he'd be out for another season. Because keep in mind, he missed all of 2024 after undergoing Tommy John surgery. So he hasn't pitched in a regular season game since May 7th, 2023. And assuming he makes a full recovery, which Mainieri expects him to be able to do so, he probably won't be pitching in a regular season game for 3 years. So 2026, considering he's out all of this year, we'll see what the recovery looks like for the fall and the spring and stuff when he's able to pitch again. But it's unfortunate because this guy worked all the way back from Tommy John and pitched in the fall, pitched in the spring, didn't get great results, especially in the preseason here over these last few weeks when he was really getting roughed up. And you could tell something was wrong. You just didn't know what it was. And it's unfortunate that it requires him to miss the season, get surgery, go through the whole process again. I can't even imagine what it's like having to go through that. And we got a question about his redshirt status and stuff. He's already got a year of redshirt under his belt because he missed all of last year due to Tommy John. So entering this season, he's a redshirt freshman because he had missed the entire redshirt sophomore because he had missed all of the previous season, and now he's gonna be redshirting again, and we'll see when he comes back, how he looks when he comes back. But I mean, look, this is a really tough blow for him, and South Carolina, fortunately, has already kind of been navigating what life has been like without Jerzembeck these first few games of the season, but now they're definitely going to have to really figure it out for an entire season, which is unfortunate because Mainieri spoke so highly of Jerz being the Friday night guy that he envisioned when he first came to South Carolina back in the summer, but it's not going to end up being that way this year, and we'll see what happens for the future.
Well, and it's devastating in any situation that this happens, but it's really particularly heartbreaking in this situation, as you mentioned, Jack, because he's just coming off of recovering from Tommy John surgery. And just to put this into perspective, and I think a lot of people watching probably already know, but the comeback from a surgery like Tommy John surgery is so incredibly straining, and it is so difficult to go through that. And then to have this on top of it, it really is heartbreaking, like I just said, especially for a guy like Jerzembeck, who had so much hope and promise coming into this season, and people were so excited to see what he can do. So just from that standpoint, I can't even imagine, and I feel for him so much, because you get through what is such a difficult challenge in Tommy John surgery. And I see it very often at the professional level, guys getting Tommy John surgery, and the way they have to work and get back to where they were and how that recovery process is. That's not an easy process. And then you go through this on top of it. I can't even imagine how strenuous it is going to be for him to have to come back from now this injury. I totally believe he can do it, have complete and total faith that he can. And like I said, he's so talented. I know he's such a motivated guy, and I know that he will. But just to be able to have to do that 2 times in a row now, it's so tough, Jack.
It's brutal. It really is. And you see this it doesn't happen that often, honestly, where a guy undergoes surgery one time, he makes it come back in the sense of like Jerzembeck here, pitching, in preseason and whatnot, and then he gets hurt again and misses the entire next season. That doesn't happen too often, where you're missing 2 straight seasons in a row. And, it happens, but like it's not too often. And with this situation, he had not been pitching well in the preseason, like I said before. I mean, he really got roughed up, honestly. But his velocity was fine and all that stuff. But you never, even Mainieri and Jerzembeck never really no one noticed necessarily that something was would lead to this, right? But once Mainieri saw the X-ray, I mean, he clearly saw that there was what he calls an incomplete stress fracture. It didn't break all the way through the bone, but you could definitely see there's a crack in the bone. So it's good to see that this got resolved sooner rather than later. I mean, look, he still has to miss the season, but it's better that they figured out something like Eli went to a doctor, and you learn what the concern is and how you can go about fixing it. I think that's the best case scenario. It stinks that he's going to miss an entire season, but that's baseball, right? You're going to have injuries. Guys always, especially pitchers, seem to get the brunt end of surgeries and stuff, and missing seasons and stuff. So South Carolina is going to have to handle this the right way, and I think they definitely are with the other pieces they have on this pitching staff.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's just becoming more and more common with pitchers. We're seeing these elbow injuries, and just hate to see it back to back for Eli Jerzembeck. We have a couple of questions here about the situation at hand. You talk about the depth of the South Carolina pitching staff, and you obviously envision Jerzembeck being such a big part of it at the top of the season. Now he's not going to be around for the rest of the season or available for South Carolina to utilize from a pitching standpoint. So depth-wise, do you still feel good about where South Carolina is? What is your thoughts, Jack, when it comes to that next man up mentality for the group?
I think they're going to be fine. Here's the thing. Losing Jerzembeck is a very big deal. Let's not get that twisted. Just because he did not have good stuff leading up to the season, that does not reflect the type of pitcher we all know he can be. As you mentioned before, Kendall, this was a guy, when healthy, I mean, he did have the Friday night stuff, quite frankly. He struck out 36 batters his freshman year, only walked 6, finished with a sub-3 ERA, and that was in 3 starts and 16 appearances. So imagine what he could have done over a full season of starting if he's healthy and pitching at his best. The sky's the limit for him. So you have to replace that aspect of it. Okay, he was gonna probably pitch a lot of innings this year if he was healthy and good to go and pitching at his best. But you're replacing that. And I think South Carolina has done a good job of that so far, knowing he was going to be out for at least the first few weeks. You have a pretty solid rotation right now of Dylan Eskew, Matthew Becker, and Jake McCoy. They all pitched beautifully in their first starts of the season. And I expect them to be able to do that, maybe even a little bit better as the season wears on here, but specifically in the bullpen and in midweek games, which I think is where, with Jerzembeck not pitching well during the preseason, if he was healthy right now, I'd see him probably in a bullpen midweek role. The Gamecocks have guys that can go out there and get outs. In fact, a lot of them. You look at guys like Brandon Stone, Parker Marlott, Jackson Susie, Ryder Garino, Zach Russell, Brendan Sweeney. The list goes on of different guys that can come in and get outs for this team. So one pitcher does not make up your entire staff, regardless of how good he is. But you have enough guys on this team that you can definitely rely on to go out there and get outs. So I wouldn't be too concerned about the depth of the pitching staff. If injuries continue to mount, that's a different story, but it's one injury. It's a big one, but I think South Carolina will be fine.
Yeah, absolutely. And going on to this next question here, obviously this is hard to tell because you just don't know what the recovery is going to look like for Jerzembeck after this surgery. And we obviously hope that it's speedy and we hope that it's quick for him, but it's just something we don't necessarily know the exact answer to this question. But Jack, how could this shake out? How much longer Jerzembeck is at South Carolina, when he could potentially go pro? What do you think?
Yeah, it definitely shakes things up a little bit. Like Mainieri back in the summer, I remember talking to him for one of the first times, like a sit-down interview about Jerzembeck and the potential of losing him to last year's draft. And that was coming off a season where, again, he didn't pitch at all in 2024 because of the surgery on his elbow. And there were still talks of him potentially getting drafted. He didn't end up getting drafted, of course, and South Carolina got him back for this year. But now that he's undergoing another surgery, he's going to have to come back to college, I think, of some sort to try to build up his draft stock again, because you haven't seen him pitch since 2023 by the time you get to 2026. A team could always take a flyer on him and sign him as an undrafted free agent or something, because I don't know if he'll get drafted. I don't think he will. If he didn't get drafted last year, after 1 year of missing baseball, I doubt he'll get drafted again, or doubt he'll get drafted at all the second time around here. So it's hard to say. I think it does change a lot of things. Like, number one, does he even come back to South Carolina next year? What does his role look like for next season? Is he going to be the same pitcher as he was when you get to 2026, 3 years ago? That's a long time to go without pitching in meaningful baseball games. So it's all speculation right now. But it does change a lot of things, because the earliest he'd go to the draft and be potentially drafted out of college pitching regularly would be the summer of 2026. And he would still have more eligibility after that. And he's only going to get older at this point. So I don't know. It's a really tough question to answer, a loaded question with a loaded answer at that. But yeah, a lot of different things to consider with what the future looks like, which is very uncertain right now.
Yeah, tough circumstances for sure. And like I said, that surgery set for March 7th per Paul Mainieri. So we will keep you all updated on that. And again, wishing Eli the absolute best, a speedy recovery as he goes through, again, very unfortunate circumstances. Jack, before we continue on with the rest of the show and talking a little bit more about South Carolina baseball, let's talk about our presenting sponsor here today.
Yep, first one right above us here. If you're watching on stream, you'll see Clint Hammond of CMG Home Loans right above us here on all of our GC live streams. But if you're listening on podcast format, wherever you get your podcast from later on, Clint is the perfect guy to call if you are in need of getting help with your mortgage or looking to buy a home. He's been in the mortgage industry for more than 20 years. He's a lifelong Gamecock fan. And like I said before, he's a longtime supporter of Gamecock Central and all of our GC live programs. So if you're interested, give him a call, 803-422-6797. The NMLS number for him is 71597, or you can go to clinthammond.com for more info.
Well, we talked about the sad news to start off the show for South Carolina baseball, but the good news for South Carolina baseball right now is that they sit at 5-0 on the season to start things off. Jack, you've had the chance to cover the team so far this year. It's obviously an exciting era for South Carolina baseball with Paul Mainieri at the helm. They've got a great group of guys, it seems, and they've been off to a really solid start. So we'll start broad, then we'll obviously narrow it down a little bit as we get into more specific questions. But what have been your first first impressions of this team, seeing them play in live game action?
They're doing what it takes to win. Look, it might not be the glitz and glamour of take Tennessee, for instance. I think Tennessee won like 29-4 yesterday in a random midweek game and, mashing the ball all over the place. That hasn't been South Carolina so far. They've won a lot of close games. In fact, yesterday against Queens, that was a one-run game going into the 8th inning. Then take the Winthrop game, for instance. South Carolina was only won by 2 runs and had to do it in comeback fashion. And then in the first game of the season, you had to get a go-ahead RBI in the late innings to break a tie game and eventually win on opening day. So you've had your fair share of close games. It hasn't always been the most exciting way to win, but it's wins nonetheless. And look, I know there's this expectation out there that you see South Carolina, you see a random midweek opponent that you know nothing about, and you're just like, all right, South Carolina should easily win this game 25-0 or some crazy number like that. And that should be the case, nothing less. And then you see that doesn't happen, and your expectations are turned into disappointment. And then you're complaining about, okay, why did South Carolina not win this game by 15 runs? That's just not realistic. That's not how baseball works. It's not basketball or football where the bigger, badder team out there is going to demolish the smaller team that you know nothing about. So that's the thing. And look, it hasn't always been the craziest wins, like I've said, but they're wins nonetheless. You're 5-0, and I think there's just a different feel, like I've said many times before, about this team. They're doing the things that maybe it's not home runs and making crazy plays or anything, but they're winning the right way by doing everything they need to do to be able to come away with a victory at the end of the game.
Well, as we say, wins are wins. And I think you put it perfectly there, Jack. Like, baseball is such a unique sport, and that's what I love about it. It's kind of anybody's game on any given day. And even some of these smaller schools, if they have a guy that comes and pitches lights out, then they could win that game very easily. It's a little bit less predictable than, like you said, a football game or a basketball game where, typically when you have a team that's significantly better on paper, that team is probably going to win. In the world of baseball, not always the case. So yeah, some of these midweek games could be sleepers for South Carolina. And that's why they've always got to stay on their toes. Even when they're done with the weekend series, they're getting into these Tuesday games, they're getting into these Wednesday games. You still got to be on top of it, because some of these teams could have a guy, they could have an ace that they pitch in that particular instance. And, it's tough when you're guys that are, going against them and you've got a guy that's performing very, very well on the bump. So far, so good for South Carolina. Wins are wins, as we say, starting off the season undefeated so far. And someone who has been phenomenal in terms of tone setting for the Gamecocks, Nathan Hall, 9 for 18 through 5 games. So he's batting .500 right now. Unbelievable numbers from him. And just a guy who has come in and really embraced the role and done such a fantastic job as the leadoff batter for this group. What have you thought about the way that he has played particularly, Jack?
Well, Maneri's let everyone know, at least in the media since like the fall, that this is what Nathan Hall was going to be for this team. And I honestly, you see it come to fruition when he's taking really good cuts in the fall scrimmages. Then in the preseason, he's one of South Carolina's better hitters. And then it's translated over to the real games here. Like you said before, 9 for 18 is a small sample size to begin the year, but he's really hitting the ball well. Like, think about this. He's only struck out 1 time this season. He's getting on base at a .545 clip, which is insanely good. And he's putting the ball in play nearly every time he comes up to bat. So he's got a chance to reach first at the very least about 17 of those 18 plate appearances. That's a crazy number to think about when you really dive into how good he's been this year. And he's doing exactly what South Carolina needs to do. He's a great center fielder, plays great defense, hits the ball well, can provide some power at the plate, and he gets on base. And he's quick on the base paths too. So again, everything you want in a prototypical leadoff hitter, just a little bit better in my opinion. And I think this is just about scratching the surface for him. I expect more power to come as the season moves along. And again, that's the same for everyone because you only have 3 homers through 5 games this year. And the weather's been cold. There's been a lot of reasons why the ball just isn't carrying out of the ballpark like you might expect otherwise. But for Hall, I really do think he's going to be probably the best addition that South Carolina could have made out of the transfer portal. And you're seeing exactly why right now.
We're ready for the weather to warm up for sure. We talked about that at the beginning of the show. I actually got a memory on my phone from probably 6-7 years ago. My brother played baseball actually at Winthrop, and they were playing at South Carolina at Founders Park. It was the coldest I have ever been in Columbia, South Carolina, despite going to college there for 4 years. I think this may have been when I was a senior in high school. So this was before I even went to South Carolina. I was so cold during that game. Like, it should not be that cold playing baseball, even in the month of February. So that just reminded me of how freezing I was in that memory that just came up on my phone. And it seems like you had some of that similar weather this week, not only in Rock Hill, obviously, but in Columbia as well. Jack, we got a couple questions that we're going to get to here, but something else that you talked about, and you did a great article on this over on GamecockCentral.com. So everybody go check it out. Jack talked about the midweek games, kind of what we can take away from those games as South Carolina fans, but the lineup, do you mess with it? What do you think?
People have asked me about that, and I think you don't do it. You don't change the lineup up just at random, right? There has to be reason for why you're doing something. And these midweek games allow you to, while they may seem meaningless and stuff, and while, like I mentioned before, you should be able to win every single midweek game you play, it allows you to tinker and move guys around, get different guys in the order. And that's what we've seen Paul Mainieri do so far. He's rolled out a few different lineups. Like, for instance, he put Jace Woida, a guy that didn't hit very well at all in the preseason. He started him at DH against Winthrop, and he had a 2-for-4 game. So it's stuff like that he's been doing. And even yesterday, he put Dalton Mayshore batting second. He moved a guy like Henry Kazmar, who was hitting second, down to the 7th spot in the order because he had been 3-for-17 through his first 4 games. And then he also got some other guys in the lineup like Ryan Bakes making his first start at catcher, and then Caden Gaskin starting at second base. So it's not going to look like that probably this weekend when they take on Milwaukee. Like, I expect a much more prototypical normal lineup out there. But right now, you're allowed to make these changes to the order because you should still be able to win. That said, if a guy's struggling, like a Talmadge Lecroy, for instance, I think is the big one that people have brought up to me is, okay, do you move him down the order? I think you do eventually. He only has 1 hit to start the season, and he's your 5-hole hitter. He's not providing much protection behind guys like Kennedy Jones and Ethan Petrie in the middle of that order. So I think eventually, if the struggles continue, you maybe move him down. But again, it's a 5-game sample size, very small to even consider making drastic changes. But it's not a bad idea to do little things that maybe will help you on any given day. And that's what you do when you have lefty-righty matchups, that splits that work better, a guy that hits well in this ballpark. It's everything you take into account to make some changes. But overall, not necessary right now.
Well, Jack, we do talk about that small sample size that we have so far, but obviously it's just what we're drawing from at this point. And we talked so much in the preseason about your expectations for this team and predictions and what you think, South Carolina could have improved on from last year, whatever that might be. And we talked about the depth with the bullpen potentially being a little bit of a concern for the group. You talked about the fact that you think from a hitting standpoint, the team would be better so far this year. Have any of your opinions changed based on what you've seen in the first 5 games of the season?
I think the only thing that has changed is I expected this to be a team that was not going to hit for as nearly as many homers and not strike out as much. That has been proven correct so far. But I think from a pitching standpoint, it's only 1 start apiece, but the rotation, I think, surpassed anyone's expectations. Like, you're getting – think about it this way. Dylan Eskew, Jake McCoy, Matthew Becker, your 3 weekend starters to begin the year. They struck out 27 batters and only walked 1 and only gave up 1 run in 15 innings of work. I mean, that's for a rotation that many had questions about. of what they could do because they don't have a Paul Skeens or some big name in the rotation that you just automatically know is going to give you 7 shutout innings every time out. South Carolina doesn't have that, but they have the guys that are going to go out there and do what you need to do to win games. And that's what you're seeing out of your starters right now. And again, it's only 1 start apiece, but it's very nice to know that you have guys that you can go out and rely on right now after having, the Jerzembeck injury and having some questions about what the rotation might end up being.
All right, we're going to talk about the Milwaukee series coming up. We'll also answer a couple of your questions. But before we do, our next sponsor, Jack.
Yep, let's go ahead and talk about Prize Picks. So in case you're unfamiliar, Prize Picks is the largest independently owned daily fantasy sports platform in all of North America. They're the easiest, most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It is just you against the numbers. So instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections. And then, of course, watch the winnings roll in. Prize Picks has quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of players and stat types. It's what makes Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. I've used Prize Picks plenty in the past, as you all know by now if you listened here for a while and heard me talk about these guys. You can pick from baseball going on right now, college basketball. I know you got hockey going on right now too, with everything going on there, with NHL picking back up here in a few days after this little break. And then you've also got, other sports going on. Literally just about anything you could think of, they've got it. So just go to prizepicks.com or download the Prize Picks app. Use the code on screen, GC, that stands for Gamecock Central, to receive a guaranteed $50 once you play, $5 in lineups.
Appreciate the ad read, Jack. The one critique, you said this little break for the NHL.
I know.
Nations is not a little break. We have a big game.
Honestly, but it's a break for like the players that just aren't.
That's true. No, you're right. I'm just giving you a hard time. Big game though coming up here tonight, and
USA Canada. It's a big game,
massive game, and very exciting times for the sport of hockey. So, anyways, this is a show about baseball here today. We won't get into all of the hockey conversation, although I could do hours and hours of podcasting about that. We will get back to the South Carolina Gamecocks. They've got a series this upcoming weekend against Milwaukee, Jack. Obviously, we talked about it. Like, it's such a matchup game, and, any given day could be anybody's game, really. But is this a series that you expect that South Carolina should sweep, given everything goes according to plan?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty simple. They should be able to, heading into, don't want to look too far ahead, heading into Clemson series next weekend, I mean, you should be undefeated. I mean, there's no excuse not to be, because you got this series this weekend, and then you got Davidson on Tuesday before things really ratchet up going into play your arch rival starting in Clemson next week. So, yes, I think they should be able to sweep this series. You look at Milwaukee, they are coming off a series loss to Mercer on opening weekend. And, Milwaukee didn't have a good year in 2024. They went 6-19 and 13-17 in league play, and it's just they weren't very good last year. But again, you can never take these types of teams for granted. It's just like playing a midweek game. You cannot let up on these teams because it can be anyone's night. And we saw it. We've seen it before, right? We've seen South Carolina lose games that people don't expect them to. Like, in my midweek recap story I wrote earlier today, I brought up the fact that it was a midweek game, but back to 2012, the year South Carolina finished as the runners-up in the College World Series, they lost a random midweek game on the road against Francis Marion. And I've heard from players about how Ray Tanner was not a happy camper after that game. And, the Gamecocks ended up having a great year. So my point is, like, you're gonna lose games at some point this year, but you should be able to beat up on these teams that you're supposed to beat up on. And it might not be the prettiest wins, but hey, if you win, that's all that matters. That's what it looks like in the win column. 5-0 is 5-0 right now. I would fully expect South Carolina, given how they've done this season, to be 8-0 after the weekend. But things can happen.
This is our annual reminder to not hit the panic button. If South Carolina does happen to lose a game that they are not supposed to lose against a team that is either significantly less talented on paper or whatever it might be, don't freak out. It's all good. I feel like we do this also at the start of football season as well.
Every year. Every year.
It's okay. It's all good. We got this. But yeah, big series coming up. And then next week, we're going to have a lot to talk about with the Clemson series. And I love that it's so early on in the season, right? It gives us a lot to talk about. And Clemson certainly a fantastic team this year. So it should be a really good matchup between the two groups. This is something I definitely think we should talk about here today. And it's a good question. Just talking about the difference in coaching, right? You're in a new coaching era for South Carolina baseball. I'm sure a lot of people are curious from your perspective, Jack, as someone who has been at every one of these games. You've talked with Paul Mainieri. You've seen the way that he's coached. You've kind of assessed the vibe up until this point. What have you noticed that's different from what we saw last year coaching-wise?
You're seeing a lot of, I think aggression is the right word to put it, like hit and runs, stealing bases, trying to bunt, which, they haven't done a great job of so far, but it's easier said than done to try to bunt a 90-mile-an-hour fastball with a metal bat. It's the little things that I've alluded to that they are doing to win games, and it's different because it's not what we're so used to of the big boppers in the lineup hitting, home runs and striking out a ton. South Carolina is going to strike out some, of course. It's baseball. You're also going to hit some homers down the stretch here for sure. But when you need to do something different, it is the ability to try to take an extra base, which I've definitely noticed so far. And I also like the way Paul has used his bullpen so far too. I think it's not strange to see the way he's just calling on different pitchers to come in. Like, we're 5 games into the year, and Parker Marlot's already pitched in 3 games this season. And he hasn't been afraid to put a freshman in a tough spot at random and also take guys out when he needs to. So overall, it's a very small sample size, as is everything in a 5-game window. But you're doing a good job pressing the right buttons so far. But the way people are going to obviously judge you really does come down to what you do next week, and then what you do, when the postseason arrives. Because you could do all this great stuff right now, but it does not mean anything if you aren't winning the big games.
Well, so far things are off to an ideal start for the South Carolina Gamecocks baseball team, and we're excited to keep on watching another series coming up this weekend against Milwaukee, and then we are going to get to talking all about that Clemson series coming up next weekend. But you don't want to skip the midweek game. Like I said, don't want to look over anything here, even those midweek games. So yeah, we're just getting started on the baseball season, and there's plenty more coming. Visit us at GamecockCentral.com. Check us out on social media at Gamecock Central. I think that's going to do it for us here today, but we appreciate all of you that joined us, that asked questions. And as always, it was so much fun. So Jack, your insight is always, always appreciated. And we will be back at it next week. So for Jack Veltri, I am Kendall Smith. This has been GC Live here on Gamecock Central. Have a great day, everybody.